this computer. Okay. And I'm going to stop my video. And I'll hold on here till I actually open things up. Still, hey, Philip.
Yeah.
Even if no one shows up, just go on through it, just like as if it's full.
Yeah.
Okay?
I will go through it the same exact way, for sure.
Yep.
Yep, you got it.
Got another minute here, and then you can start your intro. I just worry if I told people 4 o'clock, they forget which they don't know. Is it 4? Now are they from the West Coast thinking it was 4 o'clock West Coast time? See, we're gonna get it's gonna be a constant thing, but with time.
Yeah, and I might put it in writing when you send out the webinar information website. Literally like 4 p.m. East Coast time, please.
I did that.
Yeah.
I put it in the title and the description now.
It's funny, people. Yeah. Oh well.
Okay, it's 4 o'clock. So, and that one person is back, and I'm letting her in now. Okay. So, you can go ahead and get started.
Welcome, everyone. We'll just wait a few moments to let some others log in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making the time today to join in on this webinar. My name is Dr. Philip Bernhardt, and I'm currently an education professor at the Metropolitan State University of Denver and a to-teach educational consultant. I'll be leading the webinar today, which will focus on developing performance assessments. This free webinar is co-sponsored by the California State University Center for Teaching and Learning and the to-teach educational consulting company. Before we get started, I want to thank all of you for the complex and difficult work you are currently engaged in to continue to support and educate your students. This is for sure a challenging time for all involved in the process of schooling, so thanks for your hard work, creativity, and commitment. Today's webinar will run about 25 to 30 minutes. Because of the short time frame, I will not be taking questions during the webinar, but I will hang out afterwards for a little while to answer any questions. Depending on time, I may be even able to take a few minutes at the end of the webinar to answer questions. Feel free to type questions in the comment sections, and if needed, we can also respond to you via email. After the webinar, we will send out the webinar PowerPoint so you can use it as a resource. Since we are recording this webinar, I would ask that everyone take a moment and turn off their cameras. We appreciate that. I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. The primary focus of this webinar is to provide a broad overview of ideas and foundational information to support the development of performance assessments. My hope is that the information provides you with some ideas and useful guidance. I will also share a few performance assessment examples and resources that I think will be useful in helping to develop your ideas. These examples will provide everyone with some useful context and general support. As we move through the webinar, please be thinking about how performance assessments can be used in virtual spaces. Each of us is facing different situations and access to different resources. We should focus on doing our best with what we have. I will provide some guidance and make some suggestions. That said, many of these suggestions will definitely still be valuable once we return to our face-to-face classroom environments. As we move through the webinar and address each of these topics, I encourage you to brainstorm ideas and think about how performance assessments can apply to your curriculum and your current teaching situation. I encourage you to thoughtfully consider how these projects can be used to support student learning as they move through the rest of the school year. I believe performance assessments can be an excellent option to engage students and provide flexibility, choice, and ownership over learning. When you look at the research on performance assessment, there are a number of important dynamics that stand out. I think we will all agree that these are the types of positive outcomes we want for our students. First, performance assessments are student-directed, and they provide students with choice and ownership in how they plan and design their projects and demonstrate understanding. This choice helps to drive and support student interest, investment, and engagement. Second, performance assessments require a clear, delineated process for completion and the development of some type of product, or what I sometimes refer to as an artifact. This product, which will likely look different student to student, can also be a performance. Think oral presentation, the facilitation of a discussion, or even a poetry slam or musical demonstration. Performance assessments are designed to facilitate critical and creative thinking. I am sure we can all agree that these are cognitive skills and dispositions we're always trying to develop and foster in our classroom spaces. When using performance assessments, we want our students using feedback in ways that will lead to improved performance. This is similar to what happens in our profession and other professions. We get feedback and then we get better at our performance. Formative feedback should be used throughout the process. Lastly, there's a large body of research emphasizing the importance of students applying what they have learned into a new context. This important work is often referred to as transfer. This process is central to meaningful performance assessment. Before addressing the key characteristics of performance assessments, I think it's useful to provide a quick review of some important dynamics. I think these ideas will be useful as you engage in the development of your performance assessments. While traditional tests are a common and at times needed part of schooling, they don't always assess all the things we want to know about what students have learned or what they're able to do. Performance tasks provide opportunities for students to express deeper understandings about the topics they are investigating. These assessments provide a different avenue for student expression. I'm sure many of you are well familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Here is another visual spin on it that I often share with teachers. We spend a lot of time engaging our students in the knowledge generation phase, and many times our tasks and assignments only scratch the surface of critical thinking. Performance assessments allow us to strategically address critical thinking in consistent and meaningful ways. Let's take 25 to 30 seconds to scan this framework. As you do this, consider the types of thinking your assessments typically facilitate and target. As you engage in developing performance assessments, try using this framework in your planning process to ensure your assessments facilitate critical thinking. The last foundation I would like to share with you is universal design for learning. One of the best elements of performance assessments is they enable teachers to thoughtfully integrate universal design into the planning process. This framework allows teachers to intentionally differentiate. Universal design for learning allows for differentiation in how information and content are presented in different ways, how students express what they know and understand, and how students engage in the learning process. I've included a link on this slide for you to learn more about UDL as you think about your performance assessments. As you design, I encourage you to think about performance assessments in the same way as you might your more traditional tests. They should ultimately measure the learning objectives you have outlined for your students. Curricular alignment must still be a priority and a focus in your planning. So now that we understand why performance assessments are useful and some of the ways they support learning and instructional design, let's look at some key characteristics. I suggest keeping these ideas handy as you brainstorm and develop your assessments. The first characteristic has to do with developing authentic tasks for your students. Some questions you might consider. What types of work do scientists engage in? What types of activities are writers, journalists, artists, and historians involved in? What are the various ways math is utilized in the professional world? Think engineers, architects, environmentalists, public health officials, sports analysts, and even food chain suppliers. We need to ask these questions because sometimes what we ask students to do are not always applicable to life outside of school. As mentioned earlier, performance assessments require students to develop some type of product and/or performance that demonstrates their understanding of the topics being studied. These will look different student to student. In addition to facilitating critical thinking, performance assessments should challenge students to address questions and problems that do not have one right answer. For example, how might students design schools for the future? Or what types of legislation should be put into place to address the development of our public health system? These types of questions and problems should serve as a guide for student development and research. Feedback on performance assessments is key. This feedback should come during the process and not just at the end after students have submitted their work. This feedback, which can come from the teacher, from peers, and even from professionals in the field, should ultimately enhance the development of student ideas. As projects unfold, students should also be encouraged and provided space to reflect on their progress and what they are designing. As students embark on their projects, consider having students set goals, timelines, and a list of tasks. These can easily provide a context for reflection. At the end, you should also have students evaluate the process, as well as what they've developed and created. Finally, performance assessments should utilize rubrics that students use to develop projects, as well as reflect on the process at the end. Please share rubrics with students at the start of the process. Really quickly, I want to touch base on 3 parts of rubrics that I think will be useful as you assess projects and can easily be used to provide students feedback during the process and for their own reflective purposes. So when using rubrics, we need to make sure to share these with students at the start of the process. We want them to use these as they develop and hone their ideas. In fact, students can even be involved in the development of rubrics. Please note, there are 3 really important parts of a rubric that need to be thoughtfully developed. First, the performance criteria. This is what you will be assessing. These are the major attributes of the performance tasks that will be evaluated. We can't grade everything in a project, so we have to decide what is important. Second, the performance indicators. What are the different levels of performance that define one's performance? These can be used as you provide students with feedback during the process. Finally, there are the performance criteria descriptions. As teachers, we have to be able to describe the characteristics and quality that must be present at each given performance level. We must, for example, be able to clearly explain what it means to demonstrate creativity or to write with clarity at the highest and lowest levels. As a resource, I've provided a number of key questions that will help you develop your performance assessments. Let's quickly take a look. As you can see, these questions incorporate all the key characteristics and ideas that have already been discussed. I'll give you about 20 seconds or so to just take a moment and to review these questions. To move us forward, I would like to now share 2 examples and a few resources that I think will be useful for you in thinking about performance assessments. Take a few moments to quickly scan through this first project example that is focused on having students develop legislative priorities. I'll give you about 20 seconds or so to read through and consider, and then I'll highlight a few important parts. As you can see, students are required to develop both a product and present their ideas in a legislative context. Critical thinking is addressed through the development of arguments and the consideration of counterarguments. Students have choice in what legislation they pursue, and as conceptualized, there are many ways they can receive feedback on the legislation they are drafting. You can imagine such an idea can be adapted to work at various grade levels and in various contexts. Let's take a look at another example. This example is focused on having students develop deeper understandings on the meaning of community. Take a few moments to quickly scan through this brief description. As you can see, the product students are asked to develop is a physical model of their community, which could be real or even imagined. Students are asked to include and label people, buildings, resources, animals, and nature. This is definitely the type of work that takes place outside of school. One can also imagine with such a project, a feedback loop can easily become part of the process, as well as having students connect with people in the community to provide ideas for their projects. While these are two brief descriptions of performance assessment examples, I think you can imagine how such projects could be further developed. Here, I've also provided a number of examples you can peruse through on your own time. These performance assessment examples stretch across both content and grade level. These ideas, like many performance assessments, can be adapted to fit your situation and your grade level. Okay. Now let's turn our attention to consider how to make these projects work in virtual spaces. My first suggestion for making these projects work in virtual spaces is to create a repository for resources and guidance for your performance task. You need an online system to organize materials, which may include directions, rubrics, useful web resources, and other items. If your district does not provide a learning management system for this, there's some free options out there that you can use. That said, you need a space to store all materials and resources related to your performance assessment. This will allow for student accountability and student ownership. Make sure whatever you decide to use is approved within your district or school. We want to make sure student and teacher privacy is protected. Next, you need a consistent way for students to virtually communicate with you and with each other. While email can initially work, I would suggest a video conferencing and chat options. Video conferencing and chat options will be handy if students are to work in groups, for giving each other feedback, conferencing with teachers, interacting with professionals in the field, and making virtual presentations. I'm sure most of your districts have some mechanism to do this. If not, though, there are free options out there. Just make sure they are secure and approve options within your school or district. I suggest students reach out to professionals in the field that can help them develop their ideas. Think back to the example I shared earlier on developing relevant and important legislation. It would not be hard for students to email a local politician or organization to ask questions or request an interview to garner insights to help them develop their projects. As students develop the projects, they need to identify virtual platforms for creating and developing their projects. There are a number of online tools that can be utilized. While I have listed a few ideas, please check to see if your districts have free access to some of these tools. While some may require payment, there are many that are completely free and accessible for your students. Lastly, think deeply about ways students will share their work. This can be done in large groups or small groups, or even one-on-one with the teacher, or with a panel of experts who have volunteered to help. Presentations can also be pre-recorded by students and uploaded to some type of share site so classmates can peruse them and provide feedback and ask questions. Think virtual gallery walk. Whatever you decide to do, please do make sure you check with colleagues and school leaders to ensure online platforms and tools are approved and secure. There are lots of ways to utilize online resources to develop and facilitate performance assessments. Please be thoughtful about which online resources you're using, and once again, do check to make sure they are secure and approved within your school and district. Lastly, I want to provide you with some general resources that I think will be helpful as you dive into this process. Thank you for joining in on the webinar today. I would also like to thank the California State University Center for Teaching and Learning and the To Teach Educational Consulting Company for co-sponsoring this free webinar. You can use the QR codes located on the last slide of the webinar to learn more about these organizations. Keep up the good work, and thank you for your commitment to educating students.